look back in hindsight, everything is 2020. In hindsight, we make mistakes, we're learning from it. In hindsight, keeping yesterday and your tomorrow. In hindsight, it's so much clearer now.
Do you ever find yourself at a crossroads, uncertain which path to take in your career or personal life? Today, we're diving deep into the realm of leadership and personal growth with the remarkable Sabine Gedeon. As an accomplished author, speaker, and executive career and leadership strategist, Sabine has guided clients from startups to Fortune 500 companies, helping them navigate challenges and embrace transformation. So join me as we uncover Sabine's insight on navigating change, achieving growth, and empowering leaders to thrive in today's dynamic world. Welcome. Good morning, Sabine. How you doing today?
Thank you, Lee. I am doing well, and I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you today.
Oh, I am equally excited, and I already know the answer, but since I ask this question all the time, where are you calling in from?
I am calling from San Diego, California.
I know, we're on the same time zone. Someone else is up early like I am today. This is Hindsight the Podcast, and it's really about looking at things that happened in the past, some decisions and choices that were made, reevaluating your own personal journey, right? And then regurgitating some of that for the listeners so they can learn, hopefully, some lessons or some tips that you've learned along the way. And before we get started with some questions, I just like for you to take an opportunity to just talk about yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do and whatever else you want to tell us, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, or else we'll be here for hours.
I know that's right.
So I was born in Haiti. So Haiti is an island off of Florida. Migrated here just shy of 4. And so I am first generation everything. First generation in terms of, going to college, having a corporate career, all the things. And so I started my career off in human resources, and you'll appreciate this. I was in the Air Force ROTC for the 4 years in high school.
Look, I know, and I was going to ask you to talk about that.
Yes.
Go ahead, though.
So I was in the Air Force ROTC, and then I wanted to go into business for my degree. And my Captain Anstead, said, you should go into human resources. Like, you'd love it, because when he got out of the Air Force, he was a civilian for a while. He did HR. He was like, you get to travel, you get to do all these things. Like, he talked it up. I was like, okay. My parents wouldn't let me go out of state. So there was only one school in the state of Connecticut that had human resources. So I went for it. And so I have Captain Anstead to thank for my journey and my path. I did corporate HR, mostly in recruiting, talent acquisition, talent development, talent management. Went back, got my master's. This entire time that I was working, my career, I wanted to be an HR business partner. Like, I wanted to climb the corporate ladder. Like, I saw myself in that big corner office, and no one was going to stop me. And so I had a manager very early on in my career. She was a senior leader, and she was just like, in order for you to advance, you need to take on some dots. And I was like, dots? She's like, yes, development opportunities that suck. I was like, oh. So I took on the dots, needless to say, worked my butt off, finally got to a place where I finally stepped into what was my dream role, only for me to realize that it is not what I wanted to do. And in hindsight, part of that was I had outgrown the 22 or 23-year-old version of myself. What I saw in terms of the HR function in one organization early in my career was completely different from the organization, which was like 5 companies later, right? It was a lot different. And so I had a midlife career crisis because I recognized that while I wanted to help serve people, I didn't want to do it in that capacity. And so it forced me to take a step back and really ask myself 2 key questions. When have I felt the most fulfilled or alive in my career? And when have I felt the most impactful? And the answers that came back after a period of time, this wasn't immediate, was when I was sitting down with internal employees and helping them map out where they wanted to be, and then reverse engineering that. And then when I was sitting behind closed doors with leaders, and I got to see the real them, I got to see the vulnerable them. The capes were off, the bravado was down, it was just the human. And they allowed me to support them in ways that went far beyond like this is what's happening in my team. I got to support the human being. And so that's when I recognized that, leaders are very much the most underserved in organizations, because the expectation is they know everything. They got it. They'll figure it out. They'll get the results. I've seen a bigger shift now that more organizations have brought in or democratized leadership coaching. And so there's a lot more support. But back then it was just like, these are the people I want to help, because I also served or supported the leaders who they got results, but they left dead bodies in the hallways in the process of it.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, if I can support them in this way, in this more broadened way, outside of the confines of HR and compliance and all that other stuff,
right,
then it would essentially have a ripple effect on the employees and the organization as we know it. So I stepped out. I made the leap in 2018, stepped out into my own career. And so today I do a lot of different things under the umbrella of professional development, executive coaching. So I do coaching, consulting, mostly on like leadership development programs, talent optimization. I am a speaker on those topics, as well as things around growth mindset, navigating your networks or creating and building networks, and an author.
I'll tell you what, let's talk about that ROTC. When I was in high school, like I wasn't thinking about the military at all. And I don't know what really triggered. I know why I ended up going in. I don't know what really triggered me to, pull the trigger, right? Sort of these Army, terms. But what made you go into ROTC, one? And then what types of lessons did you learn in ROTC? You said it was in high school, right? What kind of lessons did you learn that early in ROTC that you kind of still take on with you?
First and foremost, discipline.
Absolutely.
Discipline. I was a hard worker. I was always a hard worker. Like being an immigrant and a child of immigrants, like A minus, you might as well have gotten an F, basically. But I admired the leadership and how they approached everything. And, Sergeant Gill, who was one of the sergeants that I was under his leadership as part of that, he stressed discipline and the importance of discipline as it related to you being successful. And, there's that saying, how you do things one way is how you do things every way. I learned that in high school, that like, if I showed up and my uniform was not fully ironed, right? Like that was a reflection of me. That was a reflection of the entire squad and everything else. Or if we were in line and I didn't have my hands right, or I wasn't positioned correctly, like it throws everybody off. And so it just taught me to look at what I was doing and pay attention to it and be consistent and disciplined in how I show up. I did ROTC initially just because I thought it was cool. Like I loved seeing them in the blue uniforms every Thursday. And it was just like, oh, they're in these cool uniforms. And so that's, I only wanted the uniform, to be completely honest. But I stayed because of the leadership. I stayed because of the camaraderie. I stayed because for the first time, it showed me that I could decide how I wanted to be and how I wanted to present myself in the world. And I could do that consistently with the support of others.
Yeah, the military definitely discipline. That's probably the only, I learned a lot of lessons in the military. Discipline is one of the bigger ones. Paying attention to your surroundings and paying attention to detail, those type of things are things that carry on through life. You know what I'm saying? Yes. That you can use throughout life in different situations. So it's kind of, I was I wouldn't say stalking, but I was researching you, right? And I heard that you had done ROTC. So I was like, oh, okay, that's a nice little connection right there. And that you live right down the street from where I live, which is pretty cool as well. So we could have did this in person, but that's neither here nor there, right?
I didn't even know I had shared that before. That's usually one of the ones that kind of stays in the back pocket.
So you do a podcast and it's called She Leads Now. You wrote a book called Lead Her Ship, Reloaded and Transformed. And you're also the founder of She Leads Network. Yeah. What put you in that space and that mindset to want to be the advocate for women, right? And be the champion in a sense, right? For women in the workplace?
Yeah, so I will answer that question. I just want to clarify. So I just recently changed the name of the podcast from She Leads Now to Power, Purpose, and Prosperity. All good, all good. This is a very recent change. And She Leads Network is something that I had been envisioning in 2017 when I was sitting in my cubicle asking myself, like, or telling myself, this can't be life. And then I actually launched it in 2021, but I've actually since, as of February,
Mm-hmm.
dismantled it, if you will. So it's no longer in existence. So just in case your audience goes looking, the website is still there, but you can't necessarily join.
All
So
right. So updated. So obviously I was not researching you as good as I thought I was. So
no,
give
because
us
those
the
things still
insights.
exist. Yeah, if you
Yeah,
search
yeah.
She Leads Now, it still comes up because
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was that for 2 years. So the SEO is there. So you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. What really inspired me to start championing women, and it wasn't even the intention wasn't about championing women. The intention was really about, I was sick and tired of the narrative around women. And it was just like, you know what? I'm a firm believer. Okay. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm a firm believer that we create our reality, right? And we can choose to adopt someone else's paradigm or whatever the societal paradigm is, or we can
Mm-hmm.
say, no, not
Right.
so.
Right.
And so, right around the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation, especially in the corporate space, around women leaving. They were the majority of those who left and created the Great Resignation. And,
Mm-hmm.
the narrative there was, oh, it's because all the women, like, they had all these other obligations or whatever, and they left. Where in reality, a lot of these women left, yes, because they had all these other obligations, but they overnight almost became school teachers, became
Mm-hmm.
caretakers, became, therapists in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the value that they were bringing wasn't being recognized. It was like, we should have been devastated that many women had to leave the workforce or had to take these breaks because they were carrying so many different loads and roles. And then as we started to come out of the pandemic, I felt like we had gotten to this place where we were like, all right, we know how powerful we are, we know how valuable we are. You are seeing more women promoted into board roles, more women promoted into the C-suite. And then it just, like anything else, right? It just started to, like, level out and die down
Plateaued.
and go right back to the thing. And I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, we will not go back into that same space only to complain about, the pay gap or complain about not having a seat at the table. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
all of these initiatives were really so that not necessarily the end goal was to change the narrative, but
Okay.
the immediate goal was to help women see how powerful they really were, to
Right.
help women see within themselves, regardless of whether or not they had a title of leader or they were sitting in a leadership position, that in every capacity that they were operating in work and home, in their communities, they were essentially leading. And so I was
Mm.
trying to build that confidence. I was trying to build that awareness so that when we did get into these, like, leadership roles, or as we do go back into the corporate spaces, that we're doing this with the confidence of knowing who we are and what we bring to the table versus still asking or begging for a seat at the table.
I've talked to a few champions, right, who recognize the same disparities, I guess, in the workplace, whether it be not equal treatments or the mass exodus, right, because they're doing other things. And for me, so I'll give you a little bit about me. In my where I work, I'm associated with ERGs, so the Employee Resource Groups, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm the president of the Veteran and Military ERG. Before that, I was a liaison for the African American Employee Resource Group. We got a lot of different ERGs, and I try to stay engaged with all of them, right, so that I can continue to learn. What What is your take on the importance to leadership of ERG, or having an understanding, or at least an open mind about trying to learn?
Yeah, great question. So when I started my career way back when dinosaurs roamed, ERGs
You
were,
ain't got me.
I know. ERGs were really just starting. I mean, we're talking so this would have been 2005, so almost 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
Mhm.
ERGs were like, they existed, but they were very much more social groups. It was just like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, we'll
Yep.
create these social groups for these particular groups. And over time, you started seeing, and so at the time I was in talent acquisition, right? And so as the organization was looking at its, diversity
Mhm.
overall, not even just like who was there in the organization, but how they were going to recruit more diverse individuals. We had this program where I was the liaison with Howard University, right? And so
Okay.
they had created this MBA program as a way to create a pipeline for leaders. And Howard University was the one of the schools that they had selected. Now, granted, most of the people who were in that role and in that capacity, they didn't look like the students, right? Like they couldn't
Of
relate
course.
to the students. I mean, I was
Right.
grateful that I was there in that department, but I brought it up and said, okay, well, we have the African American network, we have the Hispanic network at the time, we have the women's, like, let's tap into the ERGs because, they need to see representation, right? And so it was like little things like that where it's just like, okay, now we're moving from being the social group to now there's actually a business use case for this. And now we're integrating because, the best champions of an organization, or you think about if you go to buy something on Amazon, right? Like you're looking at the reviews. You want to see what other people's experiences are.
Absolutely.
So, to get the people who look like them, who are sitting in the roles, who have been with the organizations, let's bring them in. So it's not a whole bunch of HR people that don't look like them, but it's actual people who are in the business who look like them. So I was able to help support that in that capacity.
Okay.
Over time, I feel like it's just like any other movement, right? It reverted back to, okay, this is something that it's nice to have. We have to have it. Here's your little budget. Go ahead and do, a quarterly event. And, let's take your picture so that we could put it on our website and our marketing materials, right?
Propaganda.
And then 2020 happened, the reckoning of 2020. And of course, now it's just like, oh, wow, we have this gold mine here that we can then tap into, from whether it's from a, corporate social responsibility perspective, whether it's from a media perspective, or just showing this group of people that we value them. So I feel like we've come back into this place. I mean, the recent legislation is challenging that yet again. But where I see the biggest value for individuals who are in ERG, especially if you step up and be a leader, you have to look at it as you're not just leading the ERG, right? Because a lot of ERG leaders, they're not necessarily managers or leaders within whatever function they support, right? I see that as a prime opportunity where you ought to use that position to network or to build relationships with key stakeholders. And oftentimes, if you're not thinking about that and you're only thinking about the ERG, or because you have a demanding full-time job, the ERG is the last thing that you put your energy and effort to. Think about it from a strategic positioning perspective. If you were to go to a senior leader, right, and say, hey, I'm the president of X ERG, I would love your thoughts on how you're looking to, advance your department, grow, whatever the case may be. That senior leader is more likely going to sit down and talk to you, as opposed to you saying, hey, can we have a virtual coffee, or whatever the case may be. Right. And so part of being strategic is not just meeting with these senior leaders or leveraging your position to meet with these senior leaders. You're also seeding the opportunity to gain sponsorship. And that's where I've seen, especially people of color, I mean, being an immigrant, my messaging was, put your head down, work hard, someone's going to tap you on the shoulder. No, they're not. They're just going to give you more work. And so when you can be strategic and leveraging that position and leveraging that opportunity to teach, to inform, to understand what they have going on, and position your ERG to support that, you're now sowing the seed for future sponsorship, where when you're not in the room, that senior leader is advocating on your behalf because they know you, they've seen your work, and they know that you care about what's important to them.
Leveraging those opportunities, networking. Powerful words, right? You learn this in the Army. Now you're supposed to volunteer. When you're in basic training, they will say, "Hey, I need a volunteer to do something," right? And typically it's something crappy. Like, all right, hey, I'll do it. You're right, because you wanna stand out, and they like go clean the bathrooms in the DFAC or the dining facility or something like that, right? But then as it goes along and you become more conscious of volunteering for opportunities, right? Then they change it up and it'll be something good, right? Now, where am I going with this? Leveraging opportunities, leveraging your positions, volunteering, putting yourself out there can go two ways. One, people can take advantage of you, right? Especially if you're good at what you do. So you have to be conscious of that and be hypersensitive to those type of things, right? But two, it also gives you an opportunity to leverage, like you said, those relationships and build stronger relationships with decision makers and stakeholders, which can help promote your career a little bit better, right? And I try to stay conscious of all of these things, but at the same time, not making it a system, like having a genuine relationship with the person, right? And not just, I'm doing this because I want this from you, right? So that's the hard thing as well. So I said a whole lot of things in there. I encourage everyone to go out and volunteer to do things.
You have to look at your career from a strategic perspective, right? And what I've seen over the last few years is that people go in, right, to a company. I mean, this mindset no longer exists where it's just like, oh, I'm going to work here for 30 something years and then retire, right? But people go in, and especially when you're undergrad or you're coming from a different field, there's so much about an organization that it takes you a good 2 years to really get grounded in terms of how this organization works, like where I fit in the pecking order and all those other pieces, right? But your career should be something that you look at strategically. It should not just be about a job. Now, granted, there are people who work to live and not live to work. And so depending on where you are, take that with a grain of salt. But if you are career minded, if you are career driven, if you are ambitious, it's not just about like, how much money can I make? It's not just about, how can I get these promotions, but it's more of like, if I take this role, right? Let's just say you're in project management. If I take this role, what skills am I specifically going to want to learn to be able to get to the next level? So I'll give you a perfect example. When I wanted to be, past when I was an HR business partner, or let me take a step back. When I wanted to be an HR business partner, there was an opportunity. I used to support the contact center, the call center in recruiting. And there was an opportunity for a supervisor. And at that point, I felt a little stifled in my career. And I remember some of my mentors were just like, well, the best HR business partners are the ones who understand the business, because then they can, support and help the business leaders create strategy. And I was like, okay, well, the contact center is ground zero, basically, right? You learn the products of the organization, you learn the customers, you learn how we make money. And so I stepped out of HR. I took a pay cut and went into the contact center as a supervisor, not because I wanted to be in the contact center to move up, but I understood that in order for me to be effective where I wanted to be, I needed to have these skill sets. And so I'm a big person. Even when I was in HR and I was in my HR business partner role, I knew to be an effective HR business partner role, I needed to be able to tell stories with data, right? Because that's how my business leaders understood it. So I took a role in compensation so that I could learn how to tell the stories with data based on numbers and whatnot. So that's just how my mind works. And so I understand what you're saying with regards to, and I completely agree with you with being genuine in building the relationship, but be strategic. Where do you need to go? And what are the steps that you need to get there? And then who are the people who can open the doors for you? You'd be surprised. People are willing to help you. They just don't know. And they have, if you have a manager who has like 10 direct reports, they're not sitting up thinking about like, oh, what does Lee want to do with his life? Right? Like, you have to let them know, and you have to let them know how to support you. But also the onus is on you to figure out where you want to be in 10 years and then get someone to help support you in reverse engineering. What are those steps that you need to take?
What do you want to be in 10 years? That's a hard question. And that is the start of the whole journey. I believe, right? 10, 5, whatever it is, right? Doesn't have to be so far. But that is the start of the whole journey. I had another conversation and he was talking about their through line. The guest was talking about their through line. And it was kind of easy for them because they knew like their purpose in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions they made kind of followed the path that would put them in positions to be able to help people.
Mm-hmm.
I keep regurgitating it, my through line, or what is that? What is my purpose? What do I want to be in 5, 10 years, right? And that helps you to make those decisions. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Be strategic. Okay, don't listen to Lee. Listen to Sabine.
Well, no,
Be
you said
strategic.
it. Just balance.
No, I'm playing. I'm playing. No, because that is important. The strategic part goes hand in hand. It has to. You
Mm-hmm.
have to know where you want to go, right? And you have to know who can help you get there. Because 9 times out of 10, I like to use that fraction or whatever. You know, you can't get there yourself. Probably 10 times out of 10, you can't get there yourself, right? So who is in the best position to help you get where you want to go? And it doesn't mean use them.
Leverage.
You figure out, you leverage it, right? So let's use a better word. That's why I'm on here talking to you, Sabine. Hey, so let's shift it up just a little. In your experience, like, what are some common challenges women face in leadership positions, and how can they overcome those challenges?
Yeah. So first and foremost, piggybacking off of what we were just talking about, is not being clear on where they want to go, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Being a C-suite leader, that's not a clear goal, right?
Right.
That's not a clear goal. 2, not doing the work in terms of identifying who are the people who can support them in building those relationships. And so I'll take it back to my career. Earlier in my career, like I said, I was taking on all the dots. I was doing all the hard work, but I wasn't getting tapped on the shoulder for, opportunities. And I started looking at, I say Bob, but like it's just a general name to protect the identities of the people. But I started looking at Bob, and if there's a Bob listening, please don't take offense to this. And I was just like, wait a minute, Bob just got here.
Mm-hmm.
Or Bob is mediocre at best. Like, how is Bob advancing so quickly when I'm the one who's here, like, from 7 to 7 all day and every day and everything. And so I took a step back and I observed Bob. What is Bob doing? I had conversations with Bob. So how is it that such and such, like, how do you know him? Oh, well, we were in the elevator, something happened. And, I asked if we could have a meeting. And little things like I started to pick up that like Bob had a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond the work, right?
Yeah.
Bob was identifying who key leaders were. Bob was requesting skip level meetings, right? I didn't even know what skip level meetings were at the time, right? So this is where you meet with your manager's manager, someone, above your immediate leadership. And Bob was asking questions and understanding, like, what do you have going on in the business? Like, where are you driving to? What are your growth goals? Where do you see some gaps and opportunities? And Bob was collecting information from people who were more than willing to talk about themselves, right? Because now they were being asked, and people who were more than willing to say, these are my challenges, these are my opportunities. And then here's Bob saying, well, if I can support you in this, or you mentioned this is something that I'm really skilled at. So if you ever need someone, let me know. And then that's how Bob was getting, these projects. That's how Bob was getting promoted every 6 months. That's why Bob was, being recognized, like, for things that we're just like, I didn't know he did that. And so the long of short of this is, as I observed Bob, I was just like, okay, Sabine, you got to shift this. This is not about how hard you work. This is not how many hours you put in. This is about who you know and who you're building the relationships with and who knows you. And not only who knows you, but who knows what you want to do next and are in the position to advocate and champion for you. So when we look at it from the context of women, and I know I'm generalizing, but we have to get out of that mindset of I'm just going to put my head down and keep doing the work. Bob, that's not what Bob's doing. And that's why we become resentful of Bob, that he has these positions and opportunities. Yeah. We have to step outside of that, and we have to see the networking. And I know people have a aversion to that word, but we have to see the networking within the business as part of our day-to-day work, not in addition to, or something that we have to, put extra time into.
Right. What are some effective strategies that you could recommend for professionals navigating career transition? And the reason why I'm fumbling with this is because I'm also looking at veterans, right, who are transitioning from the military.
Mm.
For me, coming from the military to civilian position, there were some things that we did in the military that we don't, that. So I'll give you an example instead of trying to beat around the bush. Like, I didn't really talk to my leaders. I mean, I was in the meetings and stuff like that, but I was a leader in the Army and I was expected to do. And the only time I really talked to my leader was when I was getting orders or something to do, or there was an issue. And then everything else I was left to my own devices. But when I got to my present job, I had to adjust that
Mm.
thinking. Like, my bosses wanted to know, oh, well, where are we at? How can I help? Where, what do you, all of these different things that I wasn't familiar with. So that was one simple, because there are some very challenging lessons, things, and that just revolved for me personally around listening and hearing what was expected of me from my leadership in the civilian world. But for you, and I'll reiterate the question because I said a lot of words. What are some effective strategies that you would recommend for professionals navigating career transitions or who are facing some obstacles?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And thank you for sharing your experience. So, a couple of things, and this is coming from the first 90 days book, so way
Okay.
back when,
Yeah.
and I think and now even still, like, people give it to the leaders. So oftentimes when leaders would move into a new leadership role or a new company, they would get the
Mm-hmm.
first 90 days, right? And so the first
Yep.
90 days is all about, you're not there to save the world, you're not there to put on your cape, you are there to learn, you are there to observe, you are there to ask questions. And so a couple of things are happening when we're in a space of transitioning, whether it's from military into civilian world, or, you were a teacher and now you want to be a marketing director, whatever the case may be. A couple of things are happening that you should be aware of. Two,
Mm-hmm.
there's an identity shift that's going to have to happen, right? Because so much of your identity, so much of your paradigm was in whatever space that you were in. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to give yourself the grace, right, to understand that as I'm learning to be this new person, or as I'm learning to adapt in this new environment, there are old parts of me that I'm going to be shedding through the process. And so
Right.
giving yourself that grace and not feeling like you have to have all the answers. What I've
Mm-hmm.
seen in the past is people who make those shifts, they're because there's such anxiety, there's so much fear, there's so much worry, there's so much imposter syndrome, if you will, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to go in and prove, like, I can do this, I can figure it out. And so they won't ask questions. They
Mm-hmm.
won't say, I don't know the answer. They won't allow themselves to be vulnerable. And so that's first and foremost, right? Understand that you are transforming. So give yourself that space.
Yeah.
When you're in these new spaces, following that 90-day perspective, having conversations with your manager, having conversations with your peers, having conversations, if you are leading others, with your direct reports, and maybe even other managers, and asking them the key questions, like, I hate this one, but something to the effect of, like, what keeps you up at night? What keeps you here? What are you working on? What's important to you? So a lot of those same questions that I was mentioning with the skip level.
Yeah.
What are the rules of engagement? Meaning, how do you like to be communicated with? Do you prefer email? Do you prefer phone? Do you prefer text? Right? If there's an issue or if there's a challenge, how do you want that to be communicated? How do you prefer? And so you're going in from a place of curiosity versus
Mm.
this place of, like, I got to prove myself early on. Not, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. And I'm saying that the third time.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
main mission when you've made that transition is to learn. And even if
Right.
you're listening to this and you're like, oh, Sabine, I'm well past my 90 days. Okay. If you skipped a couple steps, go back. Go
Mm.
back. I've literally coached managers, leaders, right, where at some point they were having an issue with their direct report. In this particular case, this manager was having an issue with their direct report. Direct
Yeah.
report had been there for a good year. And I simply asked the question. I was like, well, what motivates her? He was like, I don't know. Oh, okay. Well, let's go back. Your next one-on-one. Ask that question. What
Yeah.
motivates you? And so if you are at the beginning of your transition, these are questions that you ought to be asking of the people who are going to be around you, because you won't get these things in day-to-day conversation, right? Unless it happens to come up. If you're in the middle of your transition, you've been at a space for a year and you're still feeling unsettled, you're still feeling like, wow, this is a big learning curve. Get vulnerable, ask questions. People love to help. I kid you not, there's something that is ingrained in us. I don't know where it comes from, but we're like, oh, I don't want to ask for help, or I don't want to say I don't know because I'm going to look, incompetent, or I'm going. That's all in your head. No one is thinking that. I guarantee you that people would rather you ask, how do you do this? Or what is that? Versus you spending 10 hours trying to figure it out on your own only to get it wrong. Right. And so I'm challenging those of you who, if you're in that space, ask the questions. Say, I don't know. Hey, can we take 10 minutes for you to walk me through this? People love sharing their expertise, hence why you have this podcast. People love sharing their expertise and they love teaching. And so get it out of your head that you're going to be bothering anyone, or it's a bad image against you for not knowing the answer.
That's great advice. I don't know how many times I've said it, and like I said, it's a shift for me mentally. So I'll go to someone who's a director or something like that, and I'm like, I hate to bother you, right? I preface the conversation starting off, and to your point, most times I say, no, you're not bothering. How can I help? I mean, that's usually where it goes all the time. Actually, not usually, pretty much all the time. So it is very, very an important lesson to take to heart.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, you got me thinking, man, I'm loving talking to you and listening to your perspective. I'm thinking about my initial 90 days when I first came into that role, and I've been promoted since, but there's still questions, and I'm still trying to learn how my leader wants things. So we actively get into that space. She understands that I'm coming from a military mindset. I'm understanding she's coming from her perspective, right? And being in this industry, the industry that we're in for a while. So we have a great relationship. But the important thing is ask those questions. Those are great questions. And I was writing stuff down. I got a whole sheet full of notes from you, just so you know. I'm getting coached, y'all, just like you are. So pay attention. Now, with that being said, we've talked a while. And I may not have asked you the question that you would like to really talk about. So this is an opportunity, just if you could share something, that I haven't touched on that you believe is important for the listeners.
Yeah. So the show is called Hindsight, right? And so oftentimes we don't see our greatness. We don't see our challenges. We don't really see our pitfalls. I mean, we may feel it when we're in it, but we don't really see the journey and all the pieces that led up to the journey until we're looking back years later, right? And so, for those of you, depending on where you are in your career, or no matter where you are in your career, I've come across a lot of people who are kind of at this pivotal state. Like, people get to it like somewhere within like their late to mid 30s to like early 40s, where they have that midlife career crisis, right? And really just trying to understand. I mean, obviously people also have midlife crises as well. And so oftentimes it pushes you in a place where everything that was familiar, everything that was known, everything that was safe, right? You no longer have that. And we are in this space of, well, if I'm not that, or if I don't have that, I don't know who I am. And I think that that's the best place for people to be. And I do this exercise with my clients. I started it with myself first, where I kept asking the question, who am I? Or who are you? I'll ask the clients, who are you? And then they go through the process of, I'm a vet, I'm this, I'm a senior director. Okay, those are all the identities and the roles. Who are you? And then, well, I'm a dad, I'm a brother, I'm a dad. Okay, great. Who are you? And oftentimes, as you can imagine, most people don't know the answer to that question. And they don't know the answer to that question, not because there's something wrong with them, but they have not given themselves the space to really define who they are, or get clear on who they are outside of all the roles and all the identities that they have picked up over the course of their lives. And to me, that is ground zero. That's the best place, when people are like, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Great. Now we get to create it.
Mm.
And so for those of you who are listening, this has been my challenge, and I've been challenging leaders. And when I say leaders, everybody's a leader, right?
Yep.
I'm a firm believer that it is innate. Leadership positions are leadership positions, but human beings are leaders. And so for every one of you, I challenge you to ask yourself that question, who am I?
Mm.
And don't stop until you either are absolutely clear and it doesn't include a role or an identity, or you get to that I don't know. And then from there, ask yourself, what do I want? Because now you have a clean slate. Now you're not figuring out what you want based on other people's expectations or society's expectations or narratives. And so the reason why we have so many people living unfulfilled lives, right? Even if they do have a lot of money, even if they do have a lot of things, is because at the core of it, it's not aligned with who they are and what they really want. And so that is my invitation to the audience. Get to the bottom of who am I? And if you're at I don't know, perfect. What do you want? Who do you want to be?
I wrote that down too. Right before you said who am I wrote down who am I ? I love it. And then I started while you were talking. Unfortunately, I wasn't 100% in the moment. I started thinking, who am I? You feel me?
Mm-hmm.
So I like it. And then it kind of ties back in. I talked to you about that through line.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that through line. If you can figure out who you are, right, and what you want, you can kind of plot your life. You know, obviously you're going to have obstacles and things like that, right? But it helps when those decisions or those difficult decisions come up to make the right decision or the right choice. Before we go, talk to me about your book a little bit. Lead Her, and I want to say that because as a HER in there, Lead Her Ship Reloaded and Transform. 2 questions. You can make it as long or as short as you want to answer it. What prompted you to write it, and what do you want your readers to get from it?
Yeah, so Transformed is a book that I released in 2020, and I had absolutely no intentions on releasing it. I was fresh into my entrepreneurial journey, and I was just like, I'm going to write a book on the transition from corporate to entrepreneurship, and had my whole outline. And then I heard Holy Spirit say, you need to write the other book. I was like, I'm sorry, say what? What other book? And it was just like, you need to write the other book. And instinctively I knew. So I did the outline. And so Transform the Journey to Becoming is really my a summary. I would say it is summary because it's a very thin book, a summary of my life lessons up until that point. So going from the place, being in the place of like growing up traumatic experiences to traumatic adulthood and adolescence and everything. And I liken it to the process of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And so in every area of life, and we could have talked about this too, because this is a huge piece, but we're always transitioning, we're always growing, we're always developing. And there's always a season of grief. There's a season of dying, right? There, just like we see it in nature. The trees are beautiful, the flowers are blooming, and then everything dies off. And then it comes back. That's the cycle that we're living in. We're no different than nature than that. And so Transform really talks about like those seasons of life when it feels like death, or it feels like you're in a dark place, or you feels like you're in the valley. Understanding that there's a mountain period season as well. There's a highlight season as well, and how that looks like. So that's what Transformed is about. And then Leadership Reloaded really came off of that whole notion that I told you about wanting to champion women. I did a 24 episode podcast series on that, where I spoke with leaders in human resources, leadership development, DE&I, as we started to look at what was happening in organizations, what shifts were taking place. And so Leadership Reloaded is really to support women who are in leadership roles, understanding how to navigate that. And then also for organizational leaders too, in recognizing, how do they support their women? And then not just their women, but how do they support their emerging leaders? As the workforce trends, start to show that our boomers are exiting at a very, very fast pace. And so we need to create more spaces for not just only women to be able to advance, but also that next generation.
Awesome. Okay. Where can the listeners learn, more about you? Where can they get your books? And where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so I hang out on LinkedIn. So it's Sabine Gedeon, all one word for the handle. The books are on Amazon, so if you type up my name, it'll be on there as well. And then as far as the audience connecting with me, I have a link, sabinegedeon.com/gifts. So GIFTS. You can download a bunch of free resources on mindset, on leadership, procrastination, and you can also get details about my podcast.
We talked a little bit before the podcast got started, and I was telling Sabine that I was looking to write a book, and she said, "Well, what is holding you up?" And so maybe procrastination is a little bit of that too. So let me go on there and get that free gift so I can learn a little bit about procrastination, and hopefully I can learn something that can push me in the right direction to get this book out. So thank you. And I want to send a special shout out to Captain Armstead, who pushed you in the right direction in the very beginning, right? To tell you on your career journey, which has led you to empowering women and just leaders, specifically women, but leaders all in all, because a lot of the things that Sabine's talked about, hell, you can apply, it doesn't matter what your race, gender, anything, right? You can apply these lessons today and hopefully have a better career journey. So today I had the privilege of hearing some invaluable insight from Sabine, shedding light on leadership, personal growth, and empowering women and leaders and women leaders in the professional arena. So I want to extend, my heartfelt gratitude for your wisdom and your expertise that you shared today. Now, you said something at the end, hell, we could have talked about this as well. So you may get an email. You will get an email from me saying, "Hey, would you like to do a part 2
Oh,
to
I'd
this?" And
love
we can
it.
talk. We could talk about the caterpillar, the butterfly, the journey, and all of that as well. That is a really good hindsight type conversation and foresight. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sabine.
Thank you, Lee, for having me and sharing me with your audience.
Thank you. And remember, embracing change and making thoughtful decisions can shape the trajectory of your life. And just stay tuned for more inspiring stories, particularly with Hindsight the Podcast. I said particularly, it's supposed to be, forget it. Don't worry about it. Come back, see Hindsight the Podcast, listen to us, watch us on YouTube, watch us on Spotify. And thank you again, Sabine, for your time.
Thank you, Lee.
Hey, thanks for joining me here on Hindsight the Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Jones. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. To make sure that you don't miss a single episode, why don't you just go ahead and subscribe? And also, I have a quick survey. It'll take you 1 to 3 minutes just so I can get a better understanding on how to get the best content to you. So here that is as well. Until next time, once again, thank you.